Welcome to the Lead at the Top of Your Game podcast, where we equipped you to more effectively lead your seat at any employer, business, or industry in which you choose to play. Each week, we help you sharpen your leadership acumen by cracking open the playbooks of dynamic leaders who are doing big things in their professional endeavors. And now your host, leadership tactics and organizational development expert, Karen Farrell Rhodes.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast, and thanks for joining another episode designed to help you better lead at the top of your game. Now, as you know, for season 3, each month we're featuring leaders who have fascinating roles in a particular profession or industry. And today's episode is part of our special series featuring leaders who focus on an aspect of professional development. And now, enjoy the show. Hey there, superstars. This is Karen, and welcome to another episode of the Lead at the Top of Your Game podcast. We are so pleased to have on today's show just a giant, if you will, in his own industry in the learning and development space. And we're honored to have Joe Dunlap, who is the Global Director of Training and Development at the CJK Group. And if you haven't heard of the CJK Group, it is a privately held portfolio of companies that support the book, magazine, catalog, journal, and commercial publishing industries. And they also dabble in supporting information providers. So I'm going to let Joe explain that in detail, but I was just fascinated looking up the firm, what they're doing, and how they're contributing to the world of media. Now, Joe has over 20 years of experience in L&D, which I don't understand how he does because he looks all of 17, but I'm sure he's going to give us his secrets, aging secrets. But he is a true advocate for comprehensive training and development of individuals, which includes the support and not just, one and done types of trainings. And he's going to tell you why he has an extreme passion about that in just a second. But he's very unapologetic about it, and he really wants to transform L&D from being a transactional type of intervention to a transformational ones for both individuals and the companies that they support. So welcome to the podcast, Joe.
Thank you so much, Karen. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have you. So I cannot wait to dig into your story and your passions and your current and previous work. But before we do that, let's peel back the layers of the onion a little bit and get to know a tad about you. So for as much as you feel comfortable, would you mind sharing a tad about maybe your personal life or hobbies?
Absolutely. So thank you for the comment of the youthful look that I have on my face. Some of that has to come to do with when the first time in my life I'm an empty nester. So my youngest daughter finally went off to college. My oldest daughter graduated college, and my middle daughter is a senior in college this year. So my wife and I are actually getting back to being just husband and wife. So we're getting to get out and enjoy things that we haven't enjoyed in over 20 years. So maybe that's a little bit of the shine in my face.
I bet. Give me one thing that you've gotten to do recently that you hadn't been able to do in a long time.
Believe it or not, it's just simply travel. My wife and I, because our daughters were very active in sports, that most of our weekends were occupied with something related to sports or other activities. And so now we get to get out, go on weekends, and we're just kind of exploring some of the small towns in Wisconsin and all that they have to offer. And so that's been just extremely enjoyable for us.
I bet. I don't know if they have this in Wisconsin, but Atlanta, Metro Atlanta is like huge because it's a ton of like mini cities. But my husband and I love to go to each city has especially during the spring, they have like a small arts carnival thing of sorts where you have local vendors and things. And we just love traveling from suburb to suburb to see, what the different things that they offer that really represent that particular suburb. So yeah, I definitely can get that.
Yep. My wife and I are much more on the foodie side. So we go to a lot of the festivals in local towns as they're having up like smaller little food vendors. And we like to just enjoy the taste local to the area. But absolutely.
Oh, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. So I'm curious, Joe, when you were, 16, 17, 18, Did you dream of coming a learning and development executive, or did you stumble your way into the profession? I love to
I
hear
would
the
probably
journey.
tell you if you would have asked me when I was a senior in high school what I was dreaming of being, it was actually a journalist.
Really?
So
Okay.
I saw myself, being Peter Jennings or Tom Brokaw or somebody like that on the big news. I don't think I have the face for it, but thank you for the previous comment. But yeah, that's actually what really was sort of an inspiration for me. And I think it's just because I've always been a news junkie throughout my whole life. So it was
Yeah,
just,
me
that's
too.
what I told you as a senior in high school that I was aspiring to be.
So tell us a little bit about your career journey. Where did you start and how did you end up to where you are now?
So I started in the military, and as part of what is called your MOS or your specialty within the military, after I did basic training, I was involved in personnel training.
Hmm.
And so that's where actually I got my introduction to like the ADDIE model and some of the other methodologies that learning and development professionals know. And so it kind of grew on me. But back then, and I'm dating myself, instructional design was not a degree
No,
in any
no.
college.
Yeah.
So I actually went for communications and was kind of moving along those lines because I had that interest in training. And by the time that I finished college and then went to graduate school, I kind of moved over into organizational development because there was kind of a similarity because again, there was still no learning and development field within the college. And then after graduating college or graduating graduate school, I managed to find an opportunity at a university nearby in Texas and started on the OD route, but kept kind of moving towards as learning and development opportunities presented themselves. I was that kid in the candy store raising his hand and got to do stand-up facilitation with, PowerPoint and the old overhead slide projector and things like that. And it just continued to grow for me throughout my career as that, as new technologies became around, e-learning, learning management systems, and of course the continued growth of that, I was always been that kid in the candy store, raised my hand, and said, I'll give it a try. Let me try it out. And here I am today, 20 plus years later, still in a field that I really love doing.
That is amazing.
Thank you.
And I've had quite a mix of a professional background, part in HR executive, part leadership development executive, and then organizational effectiveness executive. And so, I've been over 20 years in the business as well. It just still amazes me how companies and organizations still struggle with some of the basics of optimizing their talent through development. It seems like it never ends. There are new tools and bells and whistles and things to think about and new, models, if you will. But it seems to be a common thread, and even throughout history, when mentors were telling me, what they experienced in years past, it seems to always be a struggle. And I'm just curious if we could solve that, we'd be trillionaires right now. But I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on why a lot of companies and organizations still struggle and they're on this hamster wheel and trying to, optimize their workforces.
And I will probably tell you, at least from my experience in learning development, and we've been having the same conversations in the L&D field for over 20 years. We're still talking about the same stuff that I remember way back when I got. Now,
Yeah.
granted, we're talking about different technology, but the problem that we're still talking about is the same. You're just trying to fix it with a shiny new toy without
Right.
getting back to the human factor like you're talking about. And I think the underlying problem is that a lot of leaders are looking for a very quick fix without really understanding the human dynamic of which they're dealing, and understanding the motivations, the behaviors, the personalities of the individuals that make up their workforce. And so, that kind of here, we're going to push it upon you approach has never really worked. And I think you're starting to now see, especially with the more younger generations who are in the workforce, who are saying, we're not going to do that. We're not our parents.
That's right.
And so we saw what happened. And I always kind of now regurgitate back in those conversations to, you're now seeing a group of people who are in the workforce who knew what happened back in 2008, when we had the crash. And a lot of those parents, a lot of those kids saw what happened to their parents or their parents' friends.
Yes.
And they're not buying into the company motto loyalty that you and I grew up with.
No.
That's not in it for them whatsoever. I mean, that's what I see. We have a very young workforce that's continually entering into our industry.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the things that I hear from them is they're not buying what it was that you and I grew up with.
Yeah. And what are your thoughts on, when things aren't going well? I've seen, throughout my professional history, when things aren't going well or and within an organization, the first lever business leaders try to pull is, oh, we need training, right? Can we find a course or can we find this magical pill to help turn things around? And they're just disappointed around that. But why do you think that mindset of is so persuasive? Because it's been there forever and it's been proven not to work.
It's true. And it's typically called, we like to call it the one and done
Yeah.
mindset. And for a lot of leaders, it's this idea of, okay, well, we got educated in a classroom, so therefore that's the solution, right? And what a lot of them fail to think about is that their progress, for them to lead at the top of their game, came over years of experience.
That's right.
Of interactions with other people, of dealing with different challenges and figuring out, basically failing and then succeeding, right? And so a series of those incidences, nobody ever graduated from college or an MBA program, jumped right into a CEO role and was successful.
No, not at all.
Nobody's ever done that. And I often make the analogy when I'm having discussions with leaders about the, hey, let's do a workshop, let's do a course, let's do something e-learning, is you're kind of basically coming to the same equivalent of a football team, as an example here, is that you want to do preseason training and think that's good enough to get you to the Super Bowl. And the whole idea of continuously learning, just like their career is that, you want to do just enough to keep moving forward, but it has to be continuous. You're always adjusting for what's next, and that idea of that, football team is, who am I playing next? What do those matchups look like? What's the weather going to be? Things like that. And so the same thing in business, and we see it all the time now, is that business is constantly changing. That course, that workshop that you wanted 6 months ago is probably not going to have a shelf life of more than a year. Yeah, I mean, things are changing too fast. You see that. I can't remember some of the statistics I've read recently, but 30 to 50% of all jobs are going to be replaced or changed in the next 5-7 years.
Yes.
What's the shelf life of that workshop or that course anymore? It always has to be continuous learning so that you're ready to now deal with what comes next.
You're so right. And that was one of the reasons why I commissioned a research study and wrote the book, because I felt that most organizations, honestly, they do pretty good about delivery of training. So for that course or that module or that intervention, for that within itself in isolation, they do pretty good at that. But we really fall down on the follow-up, the ongoing support, and actually teaching our talent how to execute and how to pivot based on the new working environments or industry environments or geopolitical environments that they're having to work in. And when people don't know what to do and they get stuck, they revert back to old behaviors, no matter, what you do. So what you are saying is, it resonates with me so, so much. There's a whole area of support, and there's education, I think, to our leaders on what is needed. What are your thoughts about that?
I absolutely agree. And it's one of the things that actually learning development, and we've been talking about for 20 years, is we've been set up to be the order takers. You deliver that course, you're done, you move on.
Right.
And, as somebody who's been doing this for 20 years, I've never developed a course in my lifetime that was going to prepare anybody to do everything in relationship to their job.
Never.
I was going to get you enough to get you started with some basic understanding and some basic skills. And the expectation is that I'm going to hand you off to that manager and they're going to grow you from there. But what I've come to learn over 20 years is often that manager was expecting plug and play.
Yes.
And then they're not satisfied when that person is not plug and play. And it's like, well, that 2-week training program was never intended to develop you a full professional. I mean, that has to come with time. And when you start having that conversation, and especially because now I'm kind of in the printing business, but it's similar to the manufacturing industry, that full-fledged professional that's operating at the top of their game could be 2 to 4 years down the road of experience and time working with that machine, seeing different types of products and things that we're doing. They're not going to get all that in a month-long training that I might offer them. It's just not realistic for that. So,
and you know what? The way job hopping is going, they may not even be there 6 years down the road, right?
That is exactly true. Yeah.
So, and I always tell, clients that the training is almost like their baby steps, or maybe their ingredients for a dish. It's just one ingredient that is contributing to the final dish, if you will. But that takes a lot of care and baking and monitoring and testing and pivoting. So no, you're not going to have a cake with just, cracking one egg. That's not going to happen. You got to do a whole lot
Exactly.
more. I really want to give, I meant to do this earlier, but I want to give some space to explain to the audience what the CJK group does and how the portfolio companies kind of work together, if they do.
Absolutely. So,
Yeah.
and you did a great job of summing it up earlier. So, when you think about the industry and content management, so I'm going to kind of combine it all together. So,
Okay,
you think
sure.
about magazines, books, brochures, posters, and so what CJK did, it started off as a printing company. So, we were printing books, we're printing posters, brochures, magazines, you name it. And what our CEO has done a great job of is recognize where the industry is headed. And so we've grown through acquisition. And so now you start moving much more. You still have the foundational print business, and that's the Sheridan part of CJK. But then we also have our companies at Twiddle and KnowledgeWorks Global. And that's more and more in the digital space. So now you're looking at online magazines, online content management. And we also even offer content management services as well as the creation of that content. And now we've also grown into video and things like that. So the way that he's looking at it, that Chris Kurtzman is looking at it, is that if it's content, we probably need to be playing in that space. So that's how we grow, is we start looking for those smaller companies that are trying to get ahead and come in, and we can certainly purchase those companies if they're at that space where they want to be purchased. But that's how we're growing, is to look at what other areas of content can we get into based on the needs of business today.
And it's a training and development executive over a number of portfolio companies. How do you think about the approach to upskilling? Because the different companies, although they're in a similar type of umbrella, they probably have identities of their own and needs of their own. So how do you and your team think about approaching the diverse needs of, all of your workforce across the portfolio companies?
Yeah. So one of the things that we look at, and we start at the end of the road, and we say, what does good performance look like? And what is impacting that? So you might think about your organizational values and culture as an example.
Right.
What is that leader? And you know this very well as a leadership professional. What is that leader value? Because what that leader values is obviously going to influence that team.
That's
right?
right.
So you got to make sure that you're now hitting on some of the values that that leader wants. And then what do the employees value as well? Because they're going to be the people who are selling you to make L&D sound good, is, they actually met our needs. Because otherwise, as you well know, you deliver that course, didn't even touch or barely touch what it was they needed to learn, you get a bad reputation. And I've certainly been with organizations where that was the case, and we were not trusted because of that. So you start by kind of painting that picture of what good looks like, and you back all the way out to what basically is the beginning, or the skills. What are those skills that get us from here to here, and what value are they actually aligning to? So everything that you're building along the way needs to align to some value in some way so you can tell that story. And so what happens is that, using an agile terminology, there's user stories. So for that individual, how many user stories do you have that align to organizational value that I now need to build a learning or training resource for that helps you get to that end place? And what happens is that there's a start, middle, and end as an example. And so here's where I've got to start you so that you can start your path. But now I have to continually support you as you're going to be dealing with new things on your job, that I'm going to need to get you resources so that you can deal with those situations as you continue to grow your career.
No, absolutely. It makes a ton of sense. Do you ever get pushback from your executives of, gosh, we can't either afford the training, or it's too much time away from the core business, or we want you to prioritize? Do you ever going to get any questions or pushback? And if so, what are some of those common inquiries from the business leaders?
Yeah, and that's actually pretty common. I get pushback all the time. And a lot of it is of course, there's always the time component. right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of those leaders are being driven by what the end outcome is, which
Yeah.
is usually the product or service, right?
That's
So
right.
we've got to meet that revenue or product quality or whatever it may be. They're driven by that at the end of the day. So training really is kind of a secondary thing of how is it going to get me there.
Right.
So what I try to do is minimize as much time away from the job as possible, and now look at how can I deliver that learning that you need at that moment of need. So it becomes much more of a micro learning prospect, is that instead of doing a course, can I do a small video?
Yeah.
Can I do a job aid? Can I do these things? So therefore, when that person is confronted with that challenge, they have a resource available to them. So that you have to start thinking much more about the tools that that individual might be working in, and how do you now deliver to those tools so that they can use it, because they don't have to leave their workflow at that moment to learn something.
Yeah, absolutely. And just because some of our listeners aren't L&D professionals, they're business people in the market, can you share with them just a snippet of what micro learning is?
Yeah, so micro learning, the best way I can probably say for anybody who's not an L&D professional is think of a TikTok video.
Yes.
So you're talking about something that's 2 to 3 minutes long. It's explaining something very functional, a good YouTube video. Here's how you do this. And so it's very specific about you're doing one task, maybe a couple steps, and that's it.
That's right. That's right. And it's in very bite-sized chunks. It's very focused, very specific. And then the idea is that you have some kind of framework to string them together to make sure that they understand the red thread that flows through. What will all these steps of learning of knowledge, what will they help elevate for me as far as competencies or skills or what have you? So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Sounds great. Well, even with this conversation, Joe, it doesn't shock me now of why you selected the particular leadership tactic that you did that came from my book. And for my new listeners out there, commissioned a research study about 5 years ago, really on the aspects of successful leadership execution. And there, out of the research came 7 main tactics that are included in every single successful leadership effort. They're not brain surgery type of things, but they are tactics that you definitely should increase your acumen in. And we'd love to ask our guests on the podcast which of the 7 really popped out for them, because all 7 are equally as important and you use them in different situations. But one in particular ends up really resonating with folks. And so Joe was so kind enough to share the tactic of leading with intrapreneurship. It was one that kind of popped out for him. And for those of you who don't know, leading with intrapreneurship is all about, bringing to the table new opportunities to develop or improve processes or services or products or operations. So it's just within whatever entity you're in, whether it be an organization, a company, a nonprofit, or whatever, finding ways to continuously improve upon processes and products and services to better both individuals and the organization is all what leading with intrapreneurship is about. So I'm just curious, Joe, why did that one kind of pop out for you?
Yeah, so it actually started about 7 years ago for me. I was working with a financial services company, and they were starting to now move into the digital space. And so they wanted to move quickly. They had been very much a face to face, very traditional organization. And so now they need to move quickly and generate ideas. And so that idea of entrepreneurship really started to take hold as you were working with teams. Is what ideas do you have? We want to start throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks, so to speak. And to see the energy that came from people that I had worked with for years, in some case more than a decade, really just become alive again. Boy, now they're actually listening to me and my ideas of how we can improve as an organization. And the energy that came from that really created that engagement. And so now, having kind of moved away from that field into manufacturing, we kind of apply the principles of TWI, or training within industry. And part of that is, of the whole methodology, is that you get to a point with a professional who might be working the assembly line or whatever it may be, that they start to recognize some of the flaws that exist within the process, and they have ideas. And if you can give them a channel in which they can then start to share those ideas, and so now you start thinking about like lean manufacturing and things like that, that they can say, we can do this and make this whole process better. once they see that they have a channel in which to do that, and those changes start taking place, you have a much more engaged, energized workforce. And so having seen that across 3 different industries, in the last 10 years, I know that it just resonates with me because I've seen it applied in so many different places by so many different people that I know it works. And so I'm always very encouraging of, we want to make sure that we're giving our employees the opportunity to help us become better. It's not just a top-down mindset.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to ask you another question, Joe, and it's okay if you don't have an answer, but I'm always curious because I try to stay on top of the mega trends that are going on in the world of work. But is there anything that's kind of top of mind for you as a learning development professional that you're keeping your eye on over the next, 6 to 18 months that may impact, the work that you do or the work that you propose for your leaders to embrace?
Well, for me, and I hate to sound like a broken record, but I do have my eye on the integration of AI into our printing business, and how will those advancements start to impact the work that we do. So I'm very interested in the type of data that we're going to receive, or other advances that this technology is going to bring to the business that we do, and what will that result in from a training perspective that I may now need to incorporate. Because there's really 2 different lines of thought. Is that as AI starts to integrate itself in our business, I'm going to have to train existing people into the use of that technology. But
that's right.
We still have I still have people who are coming into the organization that I have to teach the foundation and the basics to before I can get them to that point of even discovering AI, because you still need to know how this machine runs and the traditional process before you're ready to, kind of embrace what this technology is doing for you. If you don't understand how you got there, then you're not very good as a professional. So you got to understand, what it took to get there, to understand how this technology is now benefiting you.
Absolutely. You're so right. I think we're all struggling with that right now. I do quite a bit of interim CHRO work with companies, and, they're all trying to, figure it out from a business perspective. But then when I talk to fellow colleagues from HR functions, the full breadth, I want to say functions, not just, HR itself, but it's amazing that I'm hearing that we're being brought in to help lead the thinking in this effort when a lot of us aren't trained in AI or technology and are really having to upskill ourselves, at least in what the concepts are, what it can do, and kind of think strategically about how this can impact our companies and our industries. And it sounds like you're facing the same.
Pretty much, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Joe, I'm just curious as well, with over 20 years in the industry, or work history, I should say, what does it take for you to lead at the top of your game?
For me to lead the top of my game, I want to see that commitment from the organizational leaders that they want to develop their people. Once I see that, then I'm ready to go. Everything's moving forward. But if you can't get quite that commitment, I'm going to give you a great example of this. It actually happened in the news recently. The company Slack, took an entire week off to have its workforce trained, right? It was something called Ranger status. I think it was something to that effect. But they basically shut down operations for a week so everybody could achieve Ranger status. And I thought, well, that's interesting. It's a great selling point. Yeah, we do development. But then as you start to read a little bit more, Ranger status was about 40 hours of learning, which could be about anything. And I kind of started to step back for that. I'm going, okay, so you're saying that you're committed to learning, or you're committed to employee development, but you basically stopped work because nobody had the time to go in and do a learning throughout the year. So you had to stop operations. But more importantly, you didn't even tie together what it was you needed them to learn to advance themselves, whatever. They could take any course they wanted. That's not going to create a great reputation for yourself. Certainly not for the L&D department. I feel kind of bad for them, because I think that's going to leave a bad taste in some people's mouths. It's like the annual compliance learning. Well, let's stop everything so everybody can be a Ranger status and we can have this. But I didn't view that as a commitment to learning and employee growth. I viewed that as much more of that was more of a status thing. And
it's a stopgap.
Exactly. And it kind of rubbed me the wrong way when I was reading this, because I'm like, that's not a selling point. It's actually coming across very negative.
It is. It is I think for you and me. But I think if you had, and this is just Karen's take, if it made the news on CNN or Fox or whatever where you all get your news, I think the general public would be like, wow, they're cool. They let them take any course they want to.
Yeah.
It's a publicity, I guess, enhancing thing. But if the core desire is to up-level their competencies or skill sets,
right,
it's very rare that that's going to accomplish that in a meaningful way.
Absolutely.
In my opinion, anyway. So
I agree with you.
Throw tomatoes at me, Joe.
No, I'm absolutely agreeing with you. Yeah.
Oh, well, Joe, gosh, I blinked and time has just flown by. This has been absolutely fantastic. We tremendously thank you for the gift of your time. But before I let you go, I would love for you to give voice to, and we'll have information about you in our show notes, obviously, but give voice to if people are more curious about CJK or you, how can they learn more?
Well, absolutely. So I would tell you that the best source for both is on LinkedIn. CJK, on at least a daily basis, is sharing information about all of its companies underneath all the portfolio of companies. So there's usually at least one video on a daily basis, certainly every other day, where they're telling about the history of one of our organizations and the services and products that we provide. And for me, pretty much the same. You looked at my LinkedIn profile, you'll see my history of where I've been, what I've been doing. I put myself out there just so that, if you want to have a conversation, it'd be great, but here's where I'm coming from. I want to be just upfront. So
yes. And I love that about you. I didn't really know you, before today deeply, but as you know, we do our research and you do come across as very authentic and
thank you.
You have the receipts to back it up. You always talk about good stuff. So, but we really appreciate your insights that you share with us today.
Thank you, Karen. It's been wonderful being here.
Awesome. And thank you, listeners, also for the gift of your time. We appreciate you being great supporters of the Lead at the Top of Your Game podcast. There's only one ask that I ask of you is just to subscribe and share the podcast with just one friend so that they too can gain insights on how to lead at the top of their game. Thank you so much again and see you next week. And that's our show for today. Thank you for listening to the Lead at the Top of Your Game podcast, where we help you lead your seat at any employer, business, or industry in which you choose to play. You can check out the show notes, additional episodes, bonus resources, and also submit guest recommendations on our website at leadyourgamepodcast.com. You can follow me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn by searching for the name Karen Rhodes, with Karen being spelled Karan. And if you like the show, the greatest gift you can give would be to subscribe and leave a rating on your podcast platform of choice. This podcast has been a production of Shockingly Different Leadership, a global consultancy which helps organizations execute their people, talent development, and organizational effectiveness initiatives on an on-demand project or contract basis. Huge thanks to our production and editing team for a job well done. Goodbye for now.